I lay down and I said to myself, I deeply desire to leave my body. Deeply desire to leave my body. The third time I said it, I deeply desire to leave my body. I felt a sinking feeling. Like, have you ever fallen asleep on an airplane and then jerked yourself awake because you thought you were falling?
Mm-hmm.
Well, just imagine that, but you keep falling. And you're like, whoa. And all of a sudden there's this weird sensation that you're literally disconnected from your body, like you're floating. And it kind of feels like your body's electrified a little bit. Like there's like this fine humming. If this was your body doing this, I actually told myself I want clarity, and I could start seeing through my eyelids. That's when I really got in my body, started walking around, all this stuff. It was very bizarre. All the stuff that happened at the Monroe Institute was very, I think, just sort of prepared me for what I was about to experience. And it allowed me to really differentiate my physical body from this non-physical body that we have.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. If this is not your first mind meld, you likely know I cannot resist big, irresponsible questions about consciousness and the nature of reality. As such, I want to know the deal about related concepts like remote viewing, out-of-body experiences, NDEs. Of course, there are many compelling anecdotes about the above out there, but these are really phenomena that can only be verified through direct experience. And considering that I have a poverty of such experiences, what do? Well, I, of course, must find people who seem to be trustworthy, who seem to have their heads on straight, who have had such experiences, with the exception of NDEs in this case, and just say, hey, let's just cut the bullshit and just give me that sweet astral tea straight so that I can share it with all of you. And that is precisely what I did with our guest in this one, the great Chris Ramsey. And I must say, he brewed up a stellar cup that is just brimming with quintessence. And I guess I should mention, Chris happens to be a pretty massively successful creator on YouTube, but we actually spend precisely zero time talking about that. Because in recent months, Chris has been seriously seeking, earnestly investigating some of life's biggest questions through consciousness experimentation. Like I mentioned, remote viewing, hanging out with some of the greatest living remote viewers, in fact. He was also initiated into the ways of the infamous Monroe Institute, where, if you're not familiar, they've developed a system called the Gateway Process that uses proprietary technology to achieve out-of-body states, along with really a variety of other expanded states of consciousness. So Chris has been documenting all of that experimentation on his spectacular new channel, Area 52. I am telling you, if you are into this stuff, psi phenomena like we've already mentioned, also UFOs, and I don't know what else he's going to cover down the road in the channel, but I can tell you the production quality is through the roof. I binged all of it in a pretty disgustingly brief window of time, to be honest, and I am actively experiencing the symptoms of content withdrawal at this moment. And on that note, the link for Chris's tremendous channel is in the description. Do subscribe to it. And meanwhile, the algorithm sits unstimulated. So do like, subscribe, comment, share. It is really of the utmost importance, my friends. Also give Third Eye Drops a sub wherever you listen to podcasts. We've got some truly brilliant beings in our back catalog. And if you want to not only support these transmissions, but initiate yourself deeper, rap with me, join in on a book club, a patron-only Discord server, get rewards and more, head over to patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. I would love to riff with you there. But presently, let's meld minds with Chris Ramsey. Chris, excited to have you in the mind meld, man. Like I was just saying, everything you're doing with Area 52 is like, it's pretty much what I wish I could do with a lot of these big questions and a lot of these sort of avenues of wonder dipping. And you just, I think I don't even know how I saw the first trailer, but I saw the trailer and I was like, oh man, I got to keep a lookout for this because this is precisely what I'm looking for. So congratulations on it, man. It's really good.
Thank you. I really appreciate the kind words.
So I guess just obvious first question, when did you start getting interested in things like OBEs, remote viewing, And what made you want to take that seriously in terms of exploring it?
Yeah. I mean, I could say ever since I was a kid, I was always fascinated by the unknown. I think growing up watching Unsolved Mysteries, the X-Files, those type of things, I was always attracted to fringe content. Now, when you watch these shows as you're a kid too, you get these disclaimers, especially Unsolved Mysteries, that these are based on true stories. And as a child, it's very impressionable. I'm like, oh, well, this is all real then, I guess, So I already had that idea that these things were real. And that, I think, is what led me down the path of becoming a magician professionally. And I kind of wanted to have those superpowers, to be able to read people's minds or to know the future. And, learning magic, I quickly realized that it was all tricks. And, although it's still fun, it was just all kind of made up. And I think a lot of magicians go through this sort of curve of, you start getting really skeptical of things, and this whole James Randi, type deal. And everybody becomes this sort of staunch atheist. And I think eventually, I don't know if everybody, but this is my path. I'm sort of led back into, well, let's look at this a little bit further. I had, my friend Nelson, who came up to me one day during a podcast, actually, and he said, "Oh, I was trained by these guys to do remote viewing to play the stock market," and I had no idea what any of that meant, but I was very, very interested, and he ended up teaching me. And I asked him to teach me because I saw some of his results, and they were pretty staggering. Yeah. He's not a liar. He's a very honest guy, and he's a skeptic like myself, a physicist, teacher as well, or a degree in physics. So I knew that this was coming from a place of someone who was taking a good hard look at it. And yeah, lo and behold, I started messing around with it and got some interesting results myself. And that's when I started, recording my progress into this stuff. And it was interesting because that was all supposed to be on the main channel.
Okay.
It was supposed to be on my main YouTube channel because I thought, oh, this kind of has to do with mind reading. And then I quickly realized, man, there's something here. I got to keep looking into this, and there's no room for this on the main channel. Let me start something new. And that was the genesis of it, essentially. But, to answer your question, I think I was always sort of interested in this, the unknown and mysteries and UFOs and OBEs and all of this stuff. I think it was just a matter of time before I ended up researching it a little more.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not be if you're a curious person and you're not so subtly, literally looking for magic in your own life, and slowly you start to peel away the veils of that mystery, and you're like, okay, well, really, it's this. Really, it's like you were saying, it's tricks. It's ways to manipulate people's perception or use sleight of hand or whatever the case may be. But then there are those things that are still there, like those mysteries that persist, questions about the nature of consciousness, like the big questions about what being a human being is, the paranormal, all of that stuff. Especially now, I mean, there's so many things going on now that I think keep those questions open. But when you have a close friend, like in your situation, who got connected, please recount this story, man, because it's such a weird story. Yeah. So your friend is like a competitive memory champion guy, right? And correct. He eventually was it through like Craigslist or some weird Facebook shit like that, right? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was a Facebook group. So yeah, he's a 5-time U.S. memory champion. So very visual. He actually taught me. We became friends because I wanted to know more about this stuff and how to apply it into magic. So I wanted to learn how to memorize a deck of cards, in under a minute. Never got there. Got to 5 minutes, which is pretty good.
Yeah.
But he gave me the whole sort of technicalities of it and creating a mind palace and visualization. Well, turns out there was this team that was hired by a hedge fund, I guess, that was headhunting potential newcomers, potential people who could learn sort of this process, this protocol into remote viewing, and then apply that to the stock market to make money for these people that own the hedge fund. Crazy. So on Facebook, on one of the forums he was on, or one of the pages he was on, somebody put in, something like looking for memory athletes who want to make some extra money. And he was like, sure, always up for a new opportunity. And when he signed up, he realized, they were like, oh, do you know anything about remote viewing? He thought, remote control. Like he had no idea what they were talking about. And they're like, well, to sort of perceive the future, the past, events non-locally. And he kind of rolls his eyes and like, all right, but they're paying me, so, might as well try it out. And that's when they started training him an hour a day for a month via Zoom. This was during the pandemic as well. And then after that, he proceeded to do what is known as associative remote viewing, ARV, where essentially, so remote viewing, basically, a lot of these tests are done double blind. Usually there is a picture inside an envelope and there are some numbers, random numbers jotted down on the envelope. You're given those random numbers, which have nothing to do with the picture. And with that, you're supposed to determine what this thing is and how it looks like, what it feels like, and all these different perceptions and sort of descriptors, if you will, that you have to write down about the target. With associative remote viewing, there are two pictures, apparently. And one of them has an up arrow on the back of it. One of them has a down arrow on the back of it. This is a simplified version of it. And one might be a bicycle and the other might be a bumblebee. And whatever your session yields, whatever picture it is closest to, obviously there has to be some connection to them. Whatever one it's closest to, then the tasker will know that the stock either goes up or down. It's very bizarre. And
That's
sort
weird.
of, yeah, it doesn't even seem like how would that even work?
You know what that reminds me of is when they did Bell tests, like in quantum physics, and they were trying to really measure if quantum non-locality was a thing, because this was a huge question in physics, obviously, for decades. Like famously, Einstein didn't think it was possible. He and other physicists came out with this whole sort of rationale why spooky action at a distance can't be a real thing. But one of the things they ascertained over decades when they finally were able to make these tests practical is that, and what you said reminded me of this, because as soon as they would essentially measure one particle and find that it had a spin of up, the other one that it was entangled with, no matter how far away, the spin would instantaneously be down. And the thing that's so weird about it is, I guess it is different because in these tests, it's not a pre-assigned value. Like there was no up or down before. The up and down was determined by the measurement. But it almost sounds like you're somehow creating like a physical association between two items or something like that. And maybe that has something to do with, I don't know. It's weird. I haven't heard about that.
Yeah. I don't know how it works. And I think much like quantum physics, I think we just can study the fact that it works and what the percentage or what the probability is of it working. A lot of times Nelson would actually, this is something that would happen quite regularly, but the tasker putting the up and down arrows is all, has an effect on whatever the outcome is. And so sometimes they would be 100% inaccurate, meaning the tasker, should have put an up arrow where the down arrow was, because they're getting great results, except completely the opposite of winning. So 100% loss is still amazing because it should be 50-50, right? So a lot of times, there's all this sort of retro causality and there's been a lot of really, really interesting things in remote viewing that I think they're still looking into. Hopefully, they'll look into it a lot more in the near future. But yeah.
Yeah, I had a psychologist on the show named Emma Sapala, who's, affiliated with all these Ivy League universities and, the highest possible academic credentials you can have. And she has done a lot of work on things like breath work and meditation and stuff like that. But she's interested in sort of psi phenomena and remote viewing. And she said that someone she works with within the military has told her point blank, like they're still doing it. Like they've changed the names, they've changed like whatever, but I've directly heard from people involved in this that they're absolutely still doing it. And then of course it's just like, I love the story and I hope that's true because this shit is so fascinating. Like I want to believe there's like this contingent of psychic spies somewhere that have mastered this stuff. But regardless, stories like the one you just shared on its own is super compelling without needing to go down even speculative rabbit holes. And I was pretty surprised to see that even the dude that taught your friend was like, yeah, I taught this guy. But then of course the whoever the group behind him is like shadowy, or does your friend even know, or is it all like
He was never in contact
Okay.
with them. Yeah.
that's crazy, man.
Yeah, there was NDAs involved. So
I would imagine.
yeah.
So then from your friend, you start experimenting with remote viewing yourself. What is your did he pretty much convince you by the time you started, or were you still like skeptical when you started doing it?
I'm still skeptical now.
Oh, really?
Like,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I remain skeptical. You have to be, I think, a little bit skeptical to sort of keep that open mind, because if not, you just end up going too much down the woo-woo rabbit hole, I
For
think,
sure.
as well. And I kind of really want to stay in the middle of all this. But the evidence is really compelling. And you know, is it proof? No, but it's great evidence, you know, and that's just kind of what keeps recurring. It's never hardcore proof. And I don't know if that's just the nature of the phenomenon itself to not reveal itself completely for whatever reason, because it seems like every time you get really close, it's just like you got to be
Right.
like, there's something here, and you could just never get your hands on it. But there were some times, you know, especially in the beginning, there is a sort of beginner's luck, if you will, probably the wrong term, but this sort of phenomenon that happens that when you start remote viewing, your results are usually some of the better results you'll ever get. And I think a lot of that has to do, apparently, with ego. So once you're aware that you're able to do this, it kind of retracts the ability to be able to do it. Like you get too confident or something, and then you start perceiving perhaps the wrong things, or maybe the mind state you're in isn't the right one to be able to perceive this information. So
Yeah.
there is that interesting thing. But yeah, towards the beginning, we had some really, really amazing results, which were, you know, I would categorize them as like 6, maybe 7 out of 10, which, you know, I don't want to be, you know, biased in any sort of way if I'm rating my own things, you know, so I am quite I'm quite reluctant to give myself like a really high note, and those were, I think, pretty good.
Well, you also spent time with people like Joe McMoneagle and these people who were directly involved in these formerly classified intelligence programs that were actually using psychic spies. And Joe McMoneagle is like this standout figure who not only is apparently this Michael Jordan level remote viewer, but he's also a drafter. So he can draw this shit in like precise, amazing detail. And man, the levels of trickery that would have to be, and collusion that would have to be involved for his stuff to not be real is like, I mean, I can imagine it, but the stuff on Japanese TV and the supposedly the finding of the missing children and stuff like that, it's just like, at a certain point, you know, I too remain skeptical, because I think anybody's capable of anything. People will do anything for attention and whatever. But man, his case is really compelling to me. And I mean, I would like to hear more, and I would like you to share more about your own biggest hits, like those 6, what you call a 6 out of 7. That I think I'd bump it up at least to an 8 or a 9, man, because some of that stuff, like a couple of the pictures you showed were pretty fucking spot on. But yeah, I mean, what was it like seeing someone like Joe McMoneagle and spending time with him and seeing his results, and how convincing did you find him?
Yeah, the thing about Joe, like he's the closest thing to the real deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, he's got a Legion of Merit award. This guy served the country. He was not a natural psychic, so to speak. So he wasn't someone like Uri Geller or even Ingo Swann. This guy was an army guy. You know, he was in Vietnam. He was just a soldier. And he worked intelligence as well, and had a near-death experience, which he to this day still thinks that the near-death experience didn't trigger anything, which I find kind of strange because I do hear about a lot of people who have a near death, and that kind of like opens this gateway or this portal, or maybe just like shines a little more light on it. However, he doesn't. He says that he's always had this ability, and for him, the way this got started was, I think, there was some domestic violence in his house when he was a child, and he would use that sort of sixth sense to protect his sister.
Interesting. Okay.
And one thing they found out during the years is that when remote viewing is used to protect human life, it yields more accurate results.
Wow.
Also, I mean, there's a whole rabbit hole you get into, but also entropy as well. If there's more entropy, then you can be more, the targeting can be more specific. One thing about Joe that I will say is that he's great at storytelling.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is apparent if you've ever met him. If you watch his interview with Sean Ryan, he goes on for 6 hours.
Yeah, I've watched part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you get with Joe a lot of times. He's a great storyteller, and he envelops you in these amazing tales, and he's traveled the world, and he's got so many interesting things that have happened to him, and you can read that through several books he's put out, Mind Trek and Stargate Chronicles and all of this stuff. It's just an immense sort of library of things that have happened to him. I do personally think that, after you spent decades telling these stories, you refine them,
right,
without even knowing that you do so. And so I think that there probably, this is my skeptical mind, there probably is some embellishment here and there. And I think this was also echoed by Ed May, Dr. Ed May, who spent 30 years studying Joe and who's like a brother to Joe. He said the same thing during the interview that I had with him. That doesn't discount the absolute genuine hits that he had, though.
Yeah.
And that's where things get interesting. It isn't in the stories, it's in the data. He had, when he got recruited initially, I think they did 600 people. So they had 600 people. They put out these tests, and 1% yielded significant talent, which they would deem have, some type of ESP property. And Joe, out of 6 tests, had 5 first place matches. So there's first, second, third, and fourth place. Fourth place would be if I had a bumblebee as a target and I drew a bicycle. No match whatsoever. That's a fourth place. Third place would be if I drew an insect. Okay, we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
Second place would be if I drew a wasp. And first place naturally would be if I drew a bumblebee and it was the same size, same color, same everything. You could basically lay these over one another.
Yeah.
And it would match up. Joe had 5 of those out of 6.
Wow.
It was the craziest thing they've ever seen. And so naturally, he became remote viewer number 001, which is funny, by the way, because they took away those numbers after Joe because they didn't want the enemy to know how many remote viewers they had. So he was kind of like the only double agent psychic spy, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's super dope. Just to have that distinguishment. Yeah. I think all my clothes would have some kind of like custom embroidered 001 patch or something on them.
Yeah, which is probably why we're not getting recruited anytime soon.
Yeah, no, I'm confident that I won't be. One thing I wonder too, like this is just a totally practical note, but I don't have a very vivid mind's eye, and the only reason I'm aware of the fact that I don't have a very vivid mind's eye is because I've had some altered state experiences where it's not flared up, but ignited in a way that I didn't even know was possible. Like I did an ayahuasca retreat a few years ago, and I had just the most unbelievably razor sharp mind's eye I've ever experienced in my life, where I could literally just like imagine something and it would show up in my, inner verse, like it was just like right there in front of me. And it could be things that either existed or didn't exist. Like I was trying to write a book at the time, and I was imagining this book that hadn't even been written yet in front of me with a cover with all this like dope art and everything. And I think some people have that naturally. And people like Joe, I wonder if their ability to transmit whatever they're seeing, and I don't even know if it really is mind's eye because I haven't experienced it, but whatever like whatever the mediation is between that state of remote viewing to pen on paper, which he's also very skillful at, that connection seems like it's just must be very strong for him. And I wonder, like,
Yeah.
for you and your own experience, I think you've talked about this a little bit on your show, but what is the subjective experience of remote viewing like? My sense is that it's maybe not quite what I'm imagining, in that like you're there, it's more like a feeling you're getting. But yeah, what is it like?
Yeah. So I think at first when I started it, I had no idea. I was told, well, you just kind of have to perceive things. And, for me, perceiving instantly means seeing.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're conditioned to sort of, if you watch these movies or TV shows or cartoons, psychic usually has images, right? So initially you're like, well, it's got to be images. And then I quickly learned that perceiving involves all the senses. And it involves touch, it involves smell and taste, and all of those have, different ways of describing things. So like if you're touching something, well, you're feeling texture, but you're also feeling temperature. Maybe you're feeling, whether it's solid or not. Like there's all these different like variables that go into perceiving. And so that took some time for me to sort of let go of this idea that I have to see things.
Yeah.
I think that really helped. Although sometimes you do get a clear as day image. A lot of times it'll come through more as, some type of feeling. And you just have to kind of be open to receiving it in any of those denominations. Yeah. And then that will sort of create an image of this thing that you're looking for. You're really discouraged, in fact, of imagining things. And that's the tough part, is really shutting off that analytical brain, shutting off that brain that's even creative, because it's trying to fill in those blanks naturally. That's what it does, as just every day. And so you have to be able to push that aside. And we call those analytical overlays. So, if I have something that is black, yellow, and fuzzy and buzzing, I'm quick to think, oh, it's a bumblebee. But that would be an AOL. Because maybe it isn't. All you got to do is just write down the data you're getting. Don't worry about what it is. And that was really difficult to sort of shut off. And then another thing is that I found out later on is that closing your eyes isn't a good practice for remote viewing, because it invites creativity. It invites imagination. And so if you close your eyes, we're so used to imagining things in this way, and that it'll interfere with whatever you're perceiving, essentially.
That's super interesting. One thing I wanted to bring back up before we get too far away from it, because this seems to be a theme not only in the anecdotes that I've heard, but you may be familiar with Dr. Jeff Kripal. He's an academic, but he studies a lot of, I guess for lack of a better term, paranormal phenomena. So if you see him on a podcast, he'll be talking about everything from UFOs to out of body experiences and levitation and like different psi phenomena, whatever. But he is once again, just a super nuanced and free of agenda and free thinking guy when it comes to approaching all of this stuff. So that's one of the reasons I really appreciate him. But one of the things that he's learned over time in interacting with so many people who've had weird shit happen to them or have strange abilities is that trauma does seem to be the trigger. So whether it is like a near-death experience or abusive household or something, it's
psychedelics.
Yeah, psychedelics for sure. And I talked to him about that because it seems like that's one of those things that's a reliable way to like safely traumatize yourself, like get yourself in a state where you genuinely are having a sort of at least psychical near-death experience, or like very chthonic, underworldy kind of experience. That motif, that archetype is almost something that can't be sidestepped. And that's such an interesting element of this whole thing. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but I think it's worth putting out there.
I mean, I think it applies to not only psychic ability, but I think that type of trauma in your life also applies to everything else that's going on with your consciousness.
Yeah.
For instance, comics, comedians, the best comedians out there are the ones that have come from broken homes, that,
sure.
Who've been abused as a kid or who've had drug problems. So I think that you learn a lot of lessons through trauma. I think that's the only way we can learn lessons. If we had a cushioned life, we wouldn't, be as knowledgeable about things and be as open and as wise, really. So I think that, we learn a lot from trauma. We learn a lot from all of these things. And I think that psychic ability, at least what I've discerned from it, is that it is a part of you naturally.
Yeah.
I think it was a part of our evolution at some point. Perhaps we used more of it in the past to stay alive. Joe said something really interesting to me, which was, if you look back at these tribes thousands of years ago, who was the leader of the tribe? It was the most psychic person, right? It was the shaman or the seer or whatever that is. And a lot of times, they would lead them to water. They would tell them not to take this path because there's danger. And that was just through this sort of psychic intuition, I guess. And you would come to these people and they would tell you, they would give you omens, so they would be able to see the omens. And they would be able to relate that information back to you. And through this, people have lived thousands of years. So maybe there is something to that. And so I think that these traumas, again, I don't think just sharpen your psychic ability. I think they sharpen who you are.
Yeah.
I think they teach you lessons. And I think that's what we're here for, is to learn lessons. And so, the bigger the fall, the bigger the lesson.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of ancient stuff, one of the things I've been really struck by is I've been going down this sort of like Western esoteric rabbit hole for quite a while now. But over the last few years, I've been doing a level of exploration that is a lot even for me. Like, I've been really captivated by some of the Platonic and like Neoplatonic sages around like the turn of into the Common Era-ish time. But anyway, one of the connections that you cannot unsee is a lot of the things that are said about the out-of-body experience and a lot of the things that are focused upon by a lot of these ancient mystics. Like, they have words, and I think this would be a good way to transition into some of the your experiences at the Monroe Institute. Now, you could look at this one of two ways. The skeptical way would be, oh, Bob Monroe knew all this stuff and reappropriated it using his own sort of like, unconditioned language, as if it was him revealing it for the first time. Although he says, like, we're rediscovering this. Like, I'm not trying to say he doesn't say that. But what it seems like to me is that he's just reporting his genuine experiences, and they harmonize unbelievably well with what a lot of these ancients were saying. And I've written down a bunch of examples that are both direct or very similar. And I guess I didn't really introduce Bob Monroe, but we'll get there. We'll get there. But anyway, that connection with the ancients is one of the things that's really renewed my interest in all of this out-of-body stuff, and Monroe's method in particular. Is that a rabbit hole you've gone down at all, the more kind of ancient esoteric stuff, or are you more interested from the practical point of view?
I think, no, I definitely am interested, and I'm just, I think, beginning to scratch the surface. I've, picked up a bunch of books on Hermeticism recently and started reading a lot of that stuff, and, the Emerald Tablets, all that. Yeah. When I was at the Monroe Institute and I had one of these, I don't even know what it was, but it was during a meditation. I had this sense when my body started vibrating on its own internally somehow. It's really hard to explain, but I had a sense, like a immediate sense that like whatever was happening to me was ancient. Mm-hmm. And that was a real feeling. And I remember like deeply, deeply feeling, whoa, I'm connected somehow to thousands of years of this.
Yeah.
Like take away our phones, take away our computers, take away all all this so-called knowledge we have, and we're just people experiencing reality. And I think that fundamentally, whatever was happening to me was happening to thousands of other people throughout thousands of years. I really, really felt that connection. And that's kind of what sent me down this rabbit hole to look, further into it. And yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of, I don't think we're smarter than any of the people who came before us. And I think that is a bit of a flaw in our perception of things as people. We automatically think that we're smarter than the generation before us, i.e. our parents. And then we're smarter than their parents, and so on and so forth. But just because maybe our morals have shifted, or perhaps we know how to navigate this world technologically speaking, I don't think that makes us smarter. I think there are, you take away all these things, and who are we left with? We're left with Plato and Aristotle and all these people who literally we consider the smartest thinkers, the greatest thinkers of our time, who lived thousands of years ago. So we do have to give it up to them, and at some level, not just take what they were saying and post it as an Instagram caption, but also really listen to what they were saying. And these people studied consciousness. They tried to study consciousness without the microscopes and telescopes. They did it, internally on some level. And I think to fully understand what it is we can't ignore that. I think we really have to look back at that and study what it is they were really saying, rather than, just kind of brush it off as hogwash and be like, well, that's not what the data's saying. I think it's important to recognize that their input has value, modern value, that we should take a look at. I think we can learn a lot from it.
Yeah, I'd love to riff on some of that stuff more, but I don't want to derail the conversation into my own interests too much. At least not yet, because you've got so much more shit to share that I would love you to share. But one of the things, just to touch on briefly before I forget, is that what I love about what you're saying is I think it's so obvious to anybody who's seeking, right? That there is this experience or set of experiences apparently that one can have, according to a lot of these, let's just call it mystical traditions, that lie outside the purview of academics, that lie outside the purview of what is empirically measurable even. And because of that, a lot of these teachers, around that same time that Hermeticism starts becoming this more culturally commented upon tradition or whatever, it's right around that same time I was talking about. It's like around that Alexandrian age, around 100, 200 AD, where this stuff starts getting written about more and more. And a lot of scholars up until recently actually saw that as the degradation of ancient philosophy, because they're starting to get into all this mystical stuff that's not real, or is like, I don't know, it's like it's showing that the glory days of the great Greek academic is gone, and now we're into this superstitious shit. But there's some great scholars, and it's taken me a long time to find out who they are, that really take this stuff seriously and are really bringing it back into the light. And I love shining a light on people like them, because it's so easy for their stuff just to remain so niche and so esoteric that only people with a very specific interest that are like going for a PhD would ever read. And for me, they've been absolutely medicinal in terms of thinkers to explore with nuance and depth that is really like plumbing the more difficult to comprehend ancient stuff. But there's so much nutrition down there. It's like if you're willing to like learn the terminology and the context, it's just like opens up this whole world. And yet there are these modern, like these extant practices that exist, like what Bob Monroe seemingly rediscovered. And yeah, do you want to give like the little elevator intro pitch on Bob Monroe, and then dovetail that into how you became aware of it and started exploring?
Sure, yeah. So Bob Monroe, in I think 1957, had an experience. So Bob was a sound engineer. He was also a radio host. He was kind of well known even back then. And one night he's in bed, and then for a few weeks leading up to this, or months leading up to this, he would have these vibrations before going to sleep. These intense vibrations, and they would scare him. And so he went to go see a doctor. The doctor obviously just said, you must be stressed, whatever, you're overworked. Just get some rest. And he's like, all right. And when he got home, he kept having these vibrations. And one night he was just fed up. And he's like, you know what? I'm just going to let these vibrations take over my body. And if it kills me, let it kill me. So he did this. And then he found out that, it didn't kill him. It kind of just ran its course, which was cool. And then one night he was having these vibrations. And as they were happening, he was just sort of imagining himself flying a plane, actually. And all of a sudden, he feels something bumping into his shoulder. And he goes, well, what's that? And he takes a look and he sees this weird sort of fountain.
Yeah.
This glass fountain. He's like, what is that? What a strange dream this is. And quickly realized that what he's bumping into is the ceiling. And that was the lamp, or the chandelier that was on his ceiling. And he looks down, he sees his wife in bed with another man, and he starts freaking out. He's like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, what kind of a weird dream is this, that I'm dreaming of my wife in bed with another man from this perspective, right? It's a very, very strange thing to dream about. And so he wants to get closer to see who this man is, gets close, and realizes it's himself. And then the fright of his life, sheer terror, just wraps around him, and he gets slammed back into his body. And that was his first out-of-body experience. And that was the start of a whole new life for Bob. He kept having these. He noted them down and wrote a book about them, Journeys Out of the Body. And tested himself to all sorts of different limitations to see how he could induce these. And eventually he heard about, this is interesting, this is something I didn't actually mention, but there was a case of these pilots that would fall asleep at the wheel, so to speak. And they found out that's because both engines were sort of emitting this frequency because of the sound, and they were emitting a binaural beat, essentially. So yeah. One of the engines was, let's say, 100 hertz, and the other one was at 110, which then, as we know now, when you have these sounds go into your head, you can't actually hear 10 hertz. It's too low for the human ear. But that 10 hertz frequency and those lower frequencies are like those lower states where you end up in meditation or deep sleep or relaxation. We just can't hear them. And so what happens is your brain synthesizes when it's uneven. It synthesizes that extra 10 hertz. And that's what sort of ends up in training your brain waves to follow these lower frequencies. So these pilots would doze off. And they found out that's, what it was, that was the reason. And so him, being a sound engineer, started to test this out, and then eventually came up with the binaural beats, or the hemispheric sync, hemisync, which is what it's called now. And he went off and did a test of I think it was 500 people. They rented a hotel room, and 500 people, and ran this test, and literally dozens of people who had never had these experiences before left their bodies and recalled all sorts of things that they couldn't have recalled otherwise. Wow. So that was just more proof. And this eventually led to the development of the Monroe Institute in Virginia, which then eventually caught the interest of the CIA and, intelligence agencies, because this was during the Cold, during the Cold War, where they launched Project Stargate and Center Lane and Grill Flame and Sunbeam and all these different projects. So they ended up training a bunch of CIA agents at Monroe Institute. And that's what you're probably seeing on TikTok a lot these days. Oh, the gateway experience, and you can talk to entities, and they're making it all, sound super amazing, which it is, but it's not that easy. It takes a lot of, and it's very nebulous as well once you're in those states. But that essentially is Bob Monroe, and I heard from him the first time when I was speaking to Joe McMoneagle, actually, because Joe had said that in the weekends, the CIA would pay for him to go from Fort Meade down to the Monroe Institute to see if out-of-body experiences could yield more accurate remote viewing sessions.
Yeah.
So that was a test that he did with Dr. Ed May, and they did this for a very long time. And so he told me about this, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. A few months later, I go back home. At this point, I was smoking weed at the time, and I had quit for like 10 days. It was like, I think, or maybe even 7 days. And I was starting to get really lucid dreams. I was starting to get like these crazy dreams that I didn't have, for a long time. And the reason I found out was like there's a REM rebound. Apparently your REM sleep builds up if you do any type of like cannabis or alcohol consumption. And so, I had these crazy vivid dreams. And then one night I found myself, I remember I was having a nightmare, and I opened my eyes. Like I was like forcing my eyes open. Something I'd do as a kid to get out of these nightmares. And I remember remembering it was a nightmare. I don't remember what it was. And all of a sudden I'm in my room. And I'm like, oh, phew. Kind of like a false awakening in a dream, I guess. But it felt way too real. I was in my bed. I could see everything, but it was all black and white. It was fuzzy. And I could hear this vibration, and I was buzzing. And there was this whooshing sound. It was all very strange.
Yeah.
And then I had this impression that I could just float. I thought I felt like I could just float. And I just started floating. And that scared the crap out of me. I got incredibly frightened. Slammed back into my body. Actually didn't slam back. I actually came back down into my body and sort of came to. And then I remember thinking the next night, let me do this again. I did mention I also took melatonin. So I kind of doubled up on the REM thing.
Yeah.
And the next night I was like, you know what? Let's try this again. Let's try to control it. I'm not going to be afraid this time. And so same thing happened. Kind of leave my body. I'm 3-4 feet above my bed. And I decided to turn around and look. And now I see my body. So I didn't realize the night before that I was out of body. I thought this was a dream that I was just flying.
Yeah.
But for some reason it scared me. And then the second time, now I see myself just kind of passed out. And that was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. Some people tell me, well, why are you scared? Because it wasn't a dream. That's why I was scared. Like as if I would tell you right now, look behind you and you see yourself.
Yeah.
That's how scary and real that was. I was
change my pants.
My heart was beating out of my chest. I couldn't fall asleep after that. It was like 3 a.m. or something. It was crazy. So I actually at that point didn't even make the connection of that was an out of body experience. The next few days I kept Googling and like, what is this? And I kept seeing like astral projection. It was very like people saying like, oh no, I can, fly across the universe. And this, it all seemed a little too woo-woo for me.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe it was just like some weird dream. Although it didn't feel like a dream, I kind of chalked it up to a dream. Then I reached out to the Monroe Institute, and they had programs on the gateway process. So how to train yourself essentially using these binaural beats, this hemisync technology, to induce out-of-body experiences. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. And for the first time ever in the history of the Monroe Institute, they would allow me to film the process, to film or document whatever I could during the process. And so I thought that was interesting. I signed up. So did Nelson. He ended up going a week later. And I learned how to meditate for the first time. I've never meditated in my life, and to this day I meditate now probably at least an hour a day, every day. And it was great. And then I came back home. In the last 3 months, I've had 3 separate out-of-body experiences.
Crazy.
That were all individually strange and unique. It's kept me sober. I haven't had a sip of alcohol or a puff of weed or any of that or nothing. Just completely sober, high on life.
Good for you.
Thank you. And the only reason is because I don't want to mess with it.
Yes.
I think it was such a cool, euphoric experience, and it was so surreal, like more than real. And I just don't want to mess with that. I want to kind of see how far I can go and see what this body was meant to do. This mind and this thing, whatever meat suit is, like, what is it meant to do at its fullest maximum capacity?
Yeah.
So that's, I'm eating right, I'm training every day, I'm getting up early, like all these things. It's really changed my life. It's really shaken me to the core.
That's really interesting, because one of the features of pretty much any ancient report of this stuff is that you have to be clean, more or less, like not have, I don't know about like being pristine, but the idea of almost like you're going to get an initiation or go on a retreat, it makes it seem like that's an important part of it. It almost seems like it's working in reverse for you, like it's making you naturally want to do those things. So that's interesting, and I guess that's another reason to potentially pursue this stuff. But
dude, if you've ever done, like, I mean, you've done ayahuasca, but I've done shrooms, I've done acid, I've done all these things in my youth. Like, I've had crazy trips, right?
Yeah.
And I've even, recently as last year, I was microdosing because I heard it helps with, anxiety, depression, all this stuff. And the closest thing that I could describe how I feel on a daily basis is microdosing. I have this natural euphoric feeling, like when I touch my skin. I have, like when you take those deep breaths and it feels like this, like, sort of elation you feel when you breathe, like that I feel on a daily basis. And in meditation, it gets more intense, and it kind of lingers throughout the day.
Yeah.
So I've been having these natural highs, so to speak, like, because I can compare them to actual highs that I've had, and they feel very similar.
Yeah, I would really be curious to see what would happen if you coupled psychedelics with the technique once you're comfortable with it. And I can see how that might be taboo or seem counterintuitive to people who think, why would you mix drugs, in big quotes, with these experiences? But I think drugs are these experiences. I mean, I haven't had an out of body experience that I'm aware of, but I did want to tell you this before I forget. I was just texting my friend Colin this morning, who, do you by chance know the band Circa Survive?
No.
Okay. So he's in this band called Circa Survive that they were like a big indie band from like the, I don't know, like 2005 to maybe like 2015. But anyway, through a weird twisty turny thing, we became really good friends. And he's actually the dude I went on the ayahuasca retreat with. And I was asking him this morning, I'm like, have you looked into Bob Monroe out of body experiences? He's like, no, but I told you I've had out of body experiences spontaneously, right? And I'm like, no. And he's like, so here's what he said. And it's just yet another example of, it's crazy how many overlapping weird little details there are. So he says, short version of the first time: sleep paralysis into extremely loud machine-like noise with fast, crazy vortex visual. Reminds me of DMT or ayahuasca blast off into 360-ish type vision awareness of the room, which also felt like was on the verge of breaking apart. So the room, he was saying, seemed like weird or unstable. Visual of myself on the bed below, which I kind of felt attached to with rubber bands or something. Fairly quickly shot back into my body, felt super scary, thought I must have partially died or something, told my parents and they convinced me it was a dream. And then it happened a few more times over a couple of years, all slightly different in length and feeling, but all started the same way. So like the weird little details of like the whooshing sound, the sound, like the shaking, all of that kind of stuff. It seems like it's
the tethering. A lot of people think feel that tether to their body.
Yep. And then again, I'm tempted to like go into one of these ancient near-death experience stories, because it's like, what does he describe? 360-degree vision, discovering that he can't go any further because he's tethered by something, and he eventually is told like, no, you can't die yet. You have to go back. So yeah, it's just these weird similarities where either it's got to be, it's really three options. It is what it seems like it is. It's somehow people willfully, in the case of my friend Colin, there's the smallest possible percent chance that you'd ever give a person, because he's just not that type of person to just make shit up. Or it's something that exists in the subconscious, or it is a subjective experience that a human being can have, but it's not really what it seems to be. And
Right.
that's kind of the skeptical take, right? Is that these things always happen adjacent to sleep. So how do you know it's not just a weird dream? How do you know it's not just this? How do you know it's not just, again,
Yeah.
in air quotes, these things that are more reducible to something
Right.
mundane? And I'm sure you've thought about that.
I just when people say like, well, how do you know it's not a dream? And like, your dreams on a quantum level are made up of the same thing reality is. On a quantum level, your dreams are reality. It's indiscernible. You can't see the difference on a quantum level between your dream and reality. So what does that tell you? It tells you, and we spend half of our lives, or almost, whatever it is, sleeping, or a third of our lives, or whatever. So our bodies are asleep during that time. Our mind, we all know, is creating reality, right? It never kind of shuts off. Our mind or conscious, whatever it is, something in there is projecting this reality.
Yeah.
You know that within your dream, you can be convinced that your dream is real. So, I mean, wouldn't it just be natural to think that the same goes for this reality? That maybe we're just being convinced that it's real. Like it's really hard for me to think that sleep isn't reality. Yes, it isn't this reality, this whatever this version of reality is.
Yeah.
But it's another version of reality, and I'm pretty convinced that there are maybe an infinite number of versions of reality that are all different and all strange. And maybe dreams are the convergence of those. Maybe dreams are just, reality without the brain interfering. Like, I do believe that our brain creates parameters, right? And that's what allows us to perceive time, let's say, in space. Or your brain is always trying to... It's always on sort of survival mode. It's always trying to protect itself. Like, for instance, if you think about going to the dentist, your brain's like, no, that's a terrible idea. It's going to hurt. There's going to be terrible things happening. Remember last time, think of the next time. And it creates time all of a sudden. But it doesn't also give you, how amazing the car ride's going to be, or the cute receptionist that will, give you a smile, or how you'll feel afterwards. That amazing feeling when you're done. And your brain is just worried about survival. And the first thing that your brain does after you go to the dentist, what does it do? It goes, oh, so glad we did that.
Right.
Man, we should have done that a lot sooner. So that's how you can tell that your brain is just this machine trying to protect itself. That's all it's doing. That's all your body is doing. And I think once you're asleep, I think it stops doing that completely. And that's why we don't experience time. Because your brain creates time. Mm. And I think living in this dreamlike state, time doesn't exist. Now, that doesn't mean you don't perceive time in a certain way. It just means that, like, hey, you can go 8 hours of sleep and it felt like a minute. Or you can go a minute to sleep and it feels like 8 hours. Like, there's time just behaves differently when your brain isn't involved, when your brain is shut down with the rest of your body, and now your consciousness is free to explore. I think that's what deep meditation feels like. I think that's what taking, the God dose of drugs feels like.
Yep.
I think that's what sleep feels like. And I think all of these things are just your brain shutting down and you experiencing consciousness without the limitations that your brain is setting.
Totally.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think whether you're looking at it from a modern neuroscience and cognitive science standpoint, which is that there is no direct apprehension of reality happening through our senses. And admittedly, I'm into the more, I guess, fringe way of looking at things. Like, have you gotten into like this new wave of idealist scientists and philosophers like Dr. Don Hoffman or Bernardo Kastrup or any of those guys yet?
No, not yet.
I think you'd love them because these are legitimately like genius level intellects who truly believe that consciousness is primary and that physicality is is something that consciousness is doing. Like
Right.
like is a result of something consciousness at large is
Yeah.
doing.
And it's kind of what we're seeing in quantum physics, or,
Yes.
or way down at the smallest levels. Kind of how we're sort of figuring out what reality is just like, it's when you look at it, it becomes real.
Totally. So Don Hoffman, man, like I'm actually kind of excited for you, because if you haven't gone down like the Bernardo Kastrup, Don Hoffman rabbit hole, it'll keep you occupied for a long time, because it's like it's very sophisticated, very heady, like way beyond where I can go. Like if you read, like Don put out this paper last year called like Fusions of Consciousness, where he's trying to take cutting edge theoretical physics and match it with he and his team's concept of the realm of conscious agents, is what he calls it. So he thinks what reality actually is what he calls this realm of conscious agents. And there are these like hierarchies of conscious agents that are associated with physical bodies or things or whatever, but that this level of reality that we're operating on, this physical layer of reality, is absolutely an illusion. Like it is not reality at all. It's something consciousness is doing. And he even uses evolution and evolutionary game theory to bolster this idea, because he says that if you run an evolutionary game theory simulation, which I have no idea how this is done, but apparently this is like standard stuff that happens in cognitive science labs, and you give it the ability to perceive actual reality, that population always dies. The populations that survive are populations that have maximum fitness. So they have maximum evolutionary fitness, in that they understand this thing in my environment will kill me. This thing in my environment will feed me. This thing will help me reproduce, whatever. That's what you want. You don't want to see reality. So the example he uses all the time is like, if you turn on your computer and then like 45 layers of code were like, the whole stack of code and binary and was all flying at you, you would be absolutely overwhelmed and be like, what the fuck? Like, I can't do anything with this. And he says reality is the exact same thing. Like we have evolved to perceive reality in the exact amount we need, which is actually 0%. And instead we just see we just see the information in a way that we can survive, manipulate, reproduce, etc. And that's what quote unquote reality is.
Super interesting.
Yeah. And he keeps it scientific. Like he's a meditator. He's open to this other stuff, but he doesn't like to talk about it too much, because he wants to keep it he always says, like, give me the mathematically precise theory. I want to see the mathematically precise theory. So yeah, he's a very interesting, he's what it looks like when a genius starts to take idealism seriously, and his stuff is amazing. And I love
this. I love this idea of, that we're creating reality, that sort of reality exists in a way that we can't actually perceive it. We're doing exactly what we need to survive, and that's the only perception that we'll ever have. I think that's it can't be refuted either. Like, I mean, that's the other thing. But when you said evolution, which is interesting too, is like, I'm all about Darwinism and survival of the fittest. I get it, but I also I tend to think that evolution always favors something. It always favors like you don't get like you don't get a purple polar bear. Right? You're always getting something that is favored towards its survival. And there are a lot of tests that have been done with this, and sort of there was this one test, I forget what it was, but they had a plant with a light shining on it. The plant was in a corner. And the light would end up shining on the plant more than it should have, because it was supposed to be a random sequence, and more than it should, it was shining. And so like because the plant needed light, the universe somehow on this quantum level was like, we'll just direct it towards you a little bit more and change the odds. Okay. And it would show up that this plant, when put in a room, would attract the light more than it would if it wasn't there in that particular spot. So, it makes you think, like, if the universe is one entity, let's say, just one thing,
Yes.
um, it would want to survive. It would want to live. And so when there's something that needs help to survive, the universe will sort of conspire to help it live. And through evolution, through remote viewing, through omens, through all these different little things that connect everything together, it's one entity. So it's just going to send signals through all of these invisible things that we can't see so that this one thing can survive a little bit longer or get what it's asking for or get that nourishment that it craves, in order to survive. It'll do its best to try and help things along the way, and we see that as thousands of years or millions of years or whatever that is of evolution, but maybe that's just how it's designed, and time, works differently for the universe as it does for us. But when you look at evolution, you can't help but think like, why does this bug look exactly like a leaf?
Yes.
Like exactly like a leaf. It doesn't look similar to a leaf. It is exactly a leaf.
Yeah.
Like it evolved in that way forcibly, and there are even trees that have roots that look like animals. A tree can't see. How is that possible? I get that it looks similar, but the fact that it looks identical to like insects and stuff like that is so strange. And so, I often think that like the universe is conspiring to help itself. And it's also, we all do come from the same thing. We're all made of the same things, and we're all, on, if you look at the lowest level, we're all the same thing. And, I'd like to think that the universe just wants to express itself sometimes too.
Yeah.
Like the universe wants to dance, and it wants to sing, and it wants to draw, but it can't. So what happens? Well, it comes out through us and through animals and through plants and through other things. And then it just sort of expresses itself in that way, like this conscious entity, I don't know. I don't know if we're getting too deep here.
No, brother. Are you kidding me? There is no too deep for this show. We're not deep enough yet. Yeah, man. There's like, no, I'm totally with you. I think the explanatory power, the idea that everything is reducible to some kind of evolutionary, mechanism is just, not only is it just unromantic and boring, it doesn't really hold up, especially when you look back at like the early universe and you start like, there's another philosopher named Philip Goff who is a panpsychist. So he again believes in this idea that there is some level of consciousness extant in reality at the most basic level, like even, atoms, whatever, have some measure of this immaterial quality of consciousness. There's some kind of probably proto subjective experience, even at the lowest levels of reality. But when you look at the behavior of the early universe, as far as we can measure it, like this is essentially what's called the fine-tuning argument, is that things happened in just the right way, down to such a preposterous level that to try to explain it away as mere chance is like not logical. And that doesn't mean that there's like this completely perfectly orchestrated, omnipotent guy up there who like pushed the button on his invention, but it does mean that there is some bend, this bend that you're describing, this thing that is an agency, a something that is there holding everything together, or I don't know, like that has a teleological bend to it, then a teleological bend that leads toward life, leads toward complexity, leads toward experience. And yeah, man, I'm absolutely with you.
It's itself. It's just trying to preserve itself. I think, if we're all one, then that's what that means. We're all just the same organism, and it's just trying to preserve itself. And it's doing that in the only way that it knows how, which is to maybe affect what we see as chance, but on a quantum level is just changing the probability a little bit, and a couple ones here instead of zeros, and there you go.
My probably favorite story from antiquity that I've bashed my brain against the most is the Platonic dialogue, the Timaeus. And that's the story where there's this whole Pythagorean myth of how the cosmos was created. And it's like, you in a nutshell, basically, you start with these perfect things like these archetypes, like numbers and geometry, and these things that don't exist anywhere here, yet completely perfectly describe everything that's here in a spookily perfect way, right? Like, why is it that we can perfectly use numbers and geometry and mathematics to learn things about reality? And the in a nutshell explanation is because those things are outside of space and time, to your point earlier about how there seems to be, once you hit this threshold of pure consciousness, it seems to exist outside of space and time.
Sure.
And then that seems to be a construct of this physical reality. And that's exactly what this text says, that basically this is a physical reflection of these higher truths that are instantiating and manifesting based on these pre-existing cosmic templates, basically. And that's what that made me think of. But I want to get back to your own story, man, because we haven't even talked about your time at the Monroe Institute, more than just briefly mentioning it, and the fact that you did have some out-of-body experiences. And I think the snake can eat its tail here, because I think eventually, at least I'm aware of some of Bob Monroe's experiences, seem to lead back into this incredibly deep cosmic territory. I don't know if you've gotten there yourself yet, but yeah, man, please tell more about your experience with getting into some of these states of consciousness that you can achieve, and what it's like.
Yeah. I think early on, I didn't know what to expect. Meditating was pretty foreign to me, and I've never really given it a shot. I always felt like an imposter going into a meditation, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way as well. And so this might be good for them to hear. But it isn't hard. It's not something that's difficult. Sure, it's something that requires practice, but if you're relaxed enough and you're trying to meditate, guess what? You're doing it. So that's something that I had to get over right at the beginning, was this sort of I don't know if it was like an ego blocking, or it was something that prevented me from wanting to release. But the second you do sort of succumb to ultimate physical and mental relaxation, you start to perceive things, and the things that you perceive are different from imagination. There's no way that I can properly describe the differences, because they both sound like imagination. But when you know. And so, in these meditations, I would start to perceive images that weren't memories, that weren't these two-dimensional things. They were three-dimensional, and they would appear in front of me. A mandala at one point. And they were so crystal clear. Like you had the feeling that you could look away and come back and still see it.
Wow.
It wasn't sort of ephemeral or like nebulous. It was right there, and it was very physical. And so right at the beginning, I started seeing things like this. And then I started also perceiving sounds, voices, sounds, this type of thing, and ideas. It was not until I got home that I had these out-of-body experiences, but as I was told while I was there, a lot of the consciousness things that you'll retrieve from these meditations are more important or more significant than out-of-body. Out-of-body is kind of like, prove to me that this is real. And then it happens, then you have that proof.
Right.
But all of the other things that you get from meditating are really where it's at. And that's something they really try to let you know while you're there. And so I had a few things happen. We had a lot of synchronicities happen during these meditations. So like the group that we had were all creators. And when we debrief after each of these sessions, we do, I think, like 3 to 6 sessions a day, totaling almost like 5-6 hours of meditation a day. And then we debrief between every one of these sessions. We go into our little pods first, and the check units, they call them, which are like completely sound deprived, and the blackout curtains, and you got these headphones on, and you're very, very comfortable. And so you can relax. And then after this session, you'd be a little fuzzy, and you'd go into the debrief, and we'd all talk about what it is we felt or perceived. And they wouldn't front load us with what these frequencies that they were providing us with. They wouldn't front load what they were supposed to induce. because they'd rather hear from us what we felt. And then they'd show us. And then we're like, oh, damn, that's the same thing. So like Bob established focus levels.
Yeah.
Focus level 1 is here. This is, the one state, our consciousness. Focus level 10, he calls it mind awake, body asleep. And that's usually the one that facilitates out-of-body experiences the most. And this is, if you want to know what this feels like, it's the feeling right before you fall asleep, where if you are completely still, you'll lose sensation of your limbs. Your body will become numb, essentially. And you can try this at home. If you relax for about 5 to 10 minutes without moving, completely relaxed and nothing disturbing you, you'll start to notice that your hands could be up here, or they could be down here. You can't actually tell if you can't see them. And if you imagine them up here, then they're up here. Like it's a weird state.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that reminded me of I saw this on a podcast, like a guy, it might have been Huberman actually, being hypnotized, and he was completely convinced. Oh, what did he have him do? He had him do something where he had his hand up, but he hypnotized him to a point where he didn't even know what was going on with his own. I think he completely dissociated him from his hand. That's what it was. Just he didn't even know what his hand was doing or where it was. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that is usually because like to get an out of body experience, first of all, there's like, it's one of 4 things that you have to have happen to you. So either you're in deep relaxation, sort of meditative state. This is very hard to achieve. It takes a lot of practice. Number 2, you're asleep, fast asleep. Number 3, cardiac arrest. And what was number 4? Relaxation. Just exhaustion, physical exhaustion. Like if you just ran, a marathon or something. So all 4 of these would induce an out of body state because your consciousness no longer has to babysit your body. Your consciousness says, okay, I can let go. Otherwise, it's there. If you're itchy, it's got to scratch. It's got to be there. It's got to be ready to take over at any point. And so all of these different things are when your body is basically essentially just completely dead, for lack of a better word. So to reach that state during meditation is really, really tough. It takes a lot of practice, a lot of time, but you can get to the pre-OBE state quite easily. And that pre-OBE state is where a lot of visions occur, where voices come through, where, sort of other, non-human intelligence would chime in, where you'd perceive maybe the future, past events or past lives, or the hypnotic state. This is all pre-OBE. This is where your body is very just absolutely dead, but your consciousness is wide awake. You're not in sleep yet. So you can completely be lucid. Now, when this happens, and you get to that point that you can exit, that small window is wild. It is the wildest thing, because everything else before feels just deep relaxation, a little nebulous. You're not sure what it is you're getting. Did I hear that? Did I see that?
Yeah.
Is that real? Let me write it down. Let me check later. Oh, it was real. That's cool. Like, it's all these sort of things. And then when you're dreaming, you're like, well, what is reality? None of this is real. It was a dream. But that small state in between, it's a very fine line. And that's what happened to me when I went out of body multiple times. When I was awake, I had my eyes open right before this happened. It took about 3 seconds for me to get into this state at this one point, because I was very tired. I lay down and I said to myself, I deeply desire to leave my body. Deeply desire to leave my body. The 3rd time I said it, I deeply desire to leave my body. I felt a sinking feeling. Like, have you ever fallen asleep on an airplane and then jerked yourself awake because you thought you were falling?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, just imagine that, but you keep falling. And you're falling. And you're like, whoa. And all of a sudden there's this weird sensation that you're literally disconnected from your body, like you're floating. And it kind of feels like your body's electrified a little bit. Like there's like this fine humming, this fine tune that you're sort of phasing.
Yeah.
Is the only way I can put it. It's like if this was your body doing this, like that's what it kind of feels like. You're like, whoa. And in that, You hear a lot of people who have sleep paralysis, by the way. That's the same state, except, and this is an interesting thing because I've asked a few people who've had sleep paralysis this question, knowing the answer. Before I asked them, I said, "Have you ever flown in your dreams?" And unanimously it was no. And I said, "Oh, interesting." Because I feel like that's the same type of feeling when you're in your dreams and you just fly away. And so I'm in this pre-OBE state in my body. All of a sudden, this buzz, this whatever. The first couple times I had to pry my eyes open, which was very bizarre because I'm still asleep and my eyes are still closed, but somehow they're open. And the last time I actually told myself I want clarity, and I could start seeing through my eyelids. That's when I really got in my body, started walking around, all this stuff. It was very bizarre. All this to say, I mean, this has nothing to do with my time at the Monroe Institute, but this all happened afterwards. All the stuff that happened at the Monroe Institute was very, I think, just sort of prepared me for what I was about to experience and helped me let go.
Yeah.
And I think that was extremely necessary. It made me more cognizant of the present, and it allowed me to really differentiate my physical body from this non-physical body that we have. So that was, I think, a really important state.
One of the things I've been dying to ask you now that we're onto this specifically is you talk about this experience you had after you got home, you achieve the out-of-body state, you go over to the window, you sort of, there's like still a barrier there, right? Like there's still kind of like you couldn't put your hand through like you thought you would be able to. But then you hear a voice telling you, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Right? Please retell that story. And then there's something I badly want to ask you about that.
Okay. So this was my latest out-of-body experience. It was the first time that I got to see through my eyelids, which coincidentally also happened in Nelson. Like within a week apart, we did not even discuss this. He sent me his footage of his out-of-body experience. I'd already filmed mine. And both of us saw through our eyelids. We both described the same thing, which is kind of cool. So I'm getting the buzzing feeling, the phasing. This is about, I just did an hour-long meditation at 5:35 in the morning. So it was 6:35 in the morning. I take my headphones off. I go about 3 seconds later, I'm in this phasing, and I'm like, whoa, okay, it's happening. This weird buzz, this whooshing sound, all this stuff. I open my eyes. I get out. The window wasn't exactly positioned in the same place it was, though. This is something I mentioned. I talk about this, but I put it on my Patreon. I left some details out. But essentially the window was different. It was a little bit higher, and it was different from my window. And it is something Bob Monroe describes, by the way, that whatever this reality is that you can wander around in, it's like an 80% match for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Kind of like the Upside Down in Stranger Things.
Yeah.
And he often encourages that if there's an extra door in your room or an extra window, to knock on it or go through it to see what will happen. So he encourages that. So I remember this in my state, in the state I was in. I remember looking back, seeing myself, and kind of being like, all right, well, enough of that. Don't want to stare at that too long, because it's still very scary. And I go to the window. By the way, the window had this is something I never mentioned. It had a rosary hanging from it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I don't have a rosary at all. I've never had one in my house. Had one hanging, and there's a picture, and I don't remember what the picture was. There's a picture, and there was a rosary right beside the window. Very bizarre. I go to the window, and I remember Arky, one of the trainers at the Monroe Institute, he had very similar out-of-body experiences to me. Like everything I described, he described exactly, like the colorless sort of buzzing and everything.
Okay.
And he had said one day, after a few times leaving his body, he'd get a little further, and one day he'd look in his hand, look at the window, and go, and just put his hands through the window. And he said you could feel, sort of going through the window. Like it was solid, but it was still like you can get your hand through it. I remember that. I was like, yes, let's go. All right, this is my time. And I go and just just a window. I was like, oh, okay. So maybe subconsciously I wasn't ready for that. I don't know what that was. So I decided to open the window instead. And I said, let me go outside. And it was a sunny day because it was 6:35 in the morning. And I leap outside, and I get halfway through. And it was really easy for me to leap. It was almost like floating. And then I hear a voice, and it was a female voice that I did not recognize.
Wow.
That clear as day said, "What are you doing?" Like that. Not like, "What are you doing?" Or it was like, "What are you doing?" Like almost like I wasn't supposed to be doing that.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is I think what scared me. And immediately I didn't want to turn around to see what it was. I just remember going back in and be like, oh, okay, that's enough. Seeing my body and sort of laying back down and willfully closing my eyes so I didn't see what was over here. And then just I woke up and I looked at the time and it was 6:38. So that was 3 minutes. And I was lucid the whole time. I was lucid before, during, and after. It was I wasn't asleep.
Super interesting. Super interesting.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you is, have you looked into this? It's a feature in basically all spirituality up until the modern era that we had either a personal daimon or a personal genius, or some people, I guess the only corollary in a modern sense is guardian angel
or a guide.
Yeah. But if you, so throughout, Socrates would talk about his daimon. It features heavily in, there's a story you'd probably be interested in if you haven't ever checked it out, from Plato's Republic, called the Myth of Ur. And sometimes people say it's like the first near-death experience. And I'm sure it's not the first, but it's one of the earliest, most read for sure. But that recounts the whole dying process and then rebirth process, and it explains how a daimon is attached to a soul and is essentially like the sort of keeper of the soul's fate. But then when the soul incarnates in the physical body, it loses all knowledge of that spirit and of the of its personal fate, all of that stuff. But if you start looking into even the modern Western esoteric tradition, things like ritual magic, whatever, one of the primary goals is to have what they call knowledge and conversation with that thing, to have some kind of a direct encounter with this spirit that is apparently with you. And when you said that, it almost made me think you made that thing pipe up because you were getting a little too playful. Like you're starting to stretch the leash a little bit too much. And it's like, all right, maybe I'm going to have to
That's
be
what
more...
it felt like.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. If that happened to me, I think I would be obsessed with trying to understand what that voice was and converse with that voice or something.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin, other than reaching another out-of-body state, which I've been actively trying to do. There's been a few instances of these type of, twice during 2 of my out-of-body experiences when I tried to speak. Mm-hmm. The only 2 times I tried to speak, my voice was like, it sounded like a demon.
Whoa.
Both times.
Crazy.
So the first time this was when I got back home. It was during a dream. I was having a dream and I realized it was a dream. And so I was like, oh, nice, lucid dream. I heard you can roll into an OBE from these, right? So I was in a dream and the dream started fading because I started realizing it was a dream. And then I go, wouldn't it be awesome to have an out-of-body experience, right? I just think about it. And the second I think of it, I get hurled, whoosh, like thrown. And I'm like in the dark now, floating around. And I remember feeling super excited, being like, oh, it's happening.
Yeah.
And I remembered a girl at the Monroe Institute had her first out-of-body experience at the Monroe Institute while I was there. And I interviewed her, Hannah. And she had said, as soon as she got out, she wanted to go see her sister who lived in Paris. She was like, Paris, Paris, Paris. And then whooshed her way to Paris. She was flying around Paris. It was an amazing experience. I, being super excited and scared and terrified and like anxious and panicky, I just go, Paris, Paris, Paris. And the voice that came out of my mouth was like, Paris, Paris, Paris. And I was like, I was like, oh my God. And then I felt the world shift around me, but I was still in the darkness. And I remember opening my eyes, trying to like peel them open. And as soon as I peeled them open, I see these giant black cubes just churning within like megalithic cubes, like huge, made of like almost like coal. They're like rounded edges and they're just like going into one another. And it was like loud and very scary and very real. I was right beside them and it was terrifying. I remember closing my eyes and opening them again. They were still there. It was like this tesseract, this like crazy thing.
Yeah.
And eventually wiggled my fingers, popped back in my body. And then the next time I went out of body, and by the way, Bob Monroe says, and this is something, it was funny because I read this the next day in his book, but he says that don't think of a place when you go out of body. Think of a person. Because if you think of a place, it won't work. You need to be attached to a person to go there. And so Hannah had her attachment in Paris. I didn't. And so I ended up somewhere else that I maybe shouldn't have been.
Dude, that I wanted to ask you about the cubes too. I remember you saying that now because again, man, this theme, this obsession, I didn't used to I'm not saying I understand it now, but I really didn't used to understand this obsession that like Pythagoreans, Platonists, and like the ancient world in general had with mathematics and with things like geometric shapes. And what I think now is that, well, for one, it's kind of like what I was saying before, where they view these things as the sort of transcendent, immortal tool set of reality, and that through mathematics and really plumbing the rational depths of the mind, we can peer into the mind, like the bigger mind, and see that these things, like these constructs, lay beyond our own consciousness and they're imbued into reality. But that experience sounds like you actually went to some kind of transcendent geometrical structure or being. Did it feel like it was like a machine or like it was okay, interesting.
Yeah, it felt like a giant machine. It felt like whatever this was. It was like I saw one big rounded edge cube, black coal, textured, massive, and it was just rolling in on itself with another one. It was I don't even know how to explain it. It was very loud, and I had the feeling like I shouldn't be there. Like this is like out of my league feeling.
Yeah.
Wow. And it really scared me, and that's what got me back. And then the time where I went to the window when I demanded clarity. This was Rosalie. She's a yoga teacher, and she was there with us, and she said, "If ever your out of body experiences are fuzzy, you can control it. Just demand clarity now. Just say clarity now." And so I remember not seeing anything. Instead of, I tried to open my eyes and I see the sun beaming in because my window's there. I didn't have curtains, and I was like, "Ugh, I can't do that. This won't work this time." And so that's when I went, clarity now. And as I said it again, my voice was like this deep, deep, deep voice. It scared me again. I was like, how is this coming from me? And both times I've tried to pipe up in any of these, I've been met with like this dark voice from myself. And this was the same voice I heard. I'm just making this connection now. This is interesting. During meditation at the Monroe Institute, I remember one of the latter meditations, we went from focus 10 to 12, which 12 is like communicating with whatever. 15 is no time and space. And then 21 is like the entity superhighway or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I was in focus, I think 15, might have been 21, but I think it was 15. And I remember, no, it was 21 actually. It was 21. And I remember hearing this voice, this super dark voice saying, "You are ancient. You are ancient." It was the same sounding voice, like, "You are," like booming voice, like, which scared me almost awake. Like I was like very startled and very scared by it. If anything touched me in that moment, I would have screamed like a schoolgirl. Like it was pretty unnerving to hear that. But yeah, it was the same kind of voice that I heard myself say in these out of bodies. So I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's just a subconscious way of telling me maybe I shouldn't speak in these things or like what it was. I don't know.
So interesting. It makes me think of two things. One is I've been reading a couple books lately where they talk about this really enigmatic text called the Chaldean Oracles. And we only have the Chaldean Oracles now in fragments. But people from around the same time, like that, the sort of Neoplatonic, Hermetic era, like first few centuries of the Common Era, that was like one of the what they believe to be like actually legitimately sacred channeled texts, and it's filled with things like what you're talking about, but it's written in like a hexameter or whatever, like the same way like the Iliad and the Odyssey were written in like this poetic sort of discourse. What it sounds like they're trying to communicate something very similar to what you're communicating, but using more archaic, artful language. And like maybe they understood how to navigate this space well, whereas in our era, we're just like, completely raw dogging it, no idea what we're doing. We're just like rediscovering this stuff, playing with our consciousness, whereas they seemingly had an unbroken lineage of this stuff where you could be, okay, I'm going to teach you the methods, the same way my teacher taught me, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And now unless you're part of some underground lodge or something that has somehow kept this alive, we're just rediscovering it. That's kind of what it sounds like. But the other thing I wanted to run by you that the big scary voice reminds me of is Plotinus. So he is like the father of Neoplatonism. He's an almost indistinguishable from a yogi, because he talks about his method is essentially what you're saying. It's remove yourself from sensory input, learn to open the eye of the soul, and you will behold beauties that are far beyond anything in the physical world. You can ascend all the way back to this like primordial oneness, this state of non-dualistic, just, being where you're just melted into the love of reality in the cosmos. But he had this doctrine that he called the undescended self. So he believed that while, yes, we are down here living on this earth in this meat suit, there's a more real version of us that did not descend, that is still up there in its true form, and that you can connect back with that thing. And he even talks about, so he calls it either
like your higher self.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably where this comes from. This like more new agey idea comes from. But they would talk about it like either the noetic realm, or you'll see this in the Hermetic stuff too, nous, N-O-U-S, this Greek word that means like mind. So for anybody listening, if you're ever reading any of this old stuff and you see the word like intellect, try to check if it's the word nous, because it doesn't mean like your intellect. It means like intellect at large. But he talks about it like it's a place you go. It's a thing you attain. And I'm always wondering, how literal is that? But then when you start thinking about it in the context of what you're describing, how there really is this place you can go. Literal. It seems very literal, and it doesn't seem, like he's being figurative or metaphorical in any way. Yeah. And so I know at the very beginning of this, you said like, I'm undecided, I'm skeptical, but it seems like with the out of body stuff, are you more convinced than you are with the remote viewing?
It's, again, convinced of what? Because, somebody says, oh, this is just a dream.
Right.
It doesn't feel like a dream. So it does feel different, from a dream. But I'm not entirely convinced that dreams aren't real, like some form of reality. So that's where I stand on it. And then, it might sound, because we have the inability to communicate what this is. I could write books on it, but it still won't communicate what this felt like and what it feels like now, even looking back at it. It's very vivid and strangely real, even though it's not this real. It's a different real, but it feels very real nonetheless. And it's really hard to communicate. So, whatever it was, whatever it is that is happening, I mean, it's real enough that it convinced me not to, do any extra recreational drugs or substances. It's real enough that I try to get back to it as often as I can by meditating every single day. I don't know what that is. I know that for me, it feels worthy of exploration. I think I will say that, as does remote viewing. I feel like all of this is worthy of exploration. And I think that initially, this is why I started Area 52 in the first place, or the channel, was because I want to find out for myself.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sick of people telling me what to think and what to believe, and you know, picking sides and picking teams and giving myself a label of what it is I believe. And I thought, well, the only way for me to really know is just to touch grass, just get out there and do it myself. And that's exactly what I feel about all of these subjects, whether it's, you know, UFOs or out of body experiences, or, you know, past life regression, or like all of these things. Like, I want to know. I just want to know. I'm sick of people telling me this is what it is. And it's like, I think the only way, and this has been proven to me, the only way for me to really find out is to experience it, because that's the only way I would have ever given out of bodies any thought whatsoever.
Yes.
Every fiber of my being is fighting me right now not to think that this is a dream, right? Because that's exactly what I would tell anyone if they told me what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I would say, it's a dream, bro.
Right.
Wake up.
Right,
what are you doing?
Right.
You know, that's what a lucid dream is. You having a lucid dream. Bravo. I've had lucid dreams. This isn't a lucid dream. That's all I can say. You know, I'm not here to convince anyone of it. I'm here to relay the information that I've gathered in, you know, a creative storytelling environment. And that's what I like doing. I like telling stories, and I like weaving fiction into reality. And then I do that as a magician. I do that as a videographer, and somebody who's editing video. I want to continue doing that, and I want to continue discovering what is real for me and what isn't, and what are my limitations, and what are the limitations of my consciousness.
Yeah.
And the only way I know how to do that is to continue to try. And I think anybody who gives this any time whatsoever or any effort whatsoever will undoubtedly be rewarded in some way. Now, I'm not saying you're going to have these life-changing experiences that I've had. Perhaps you will, but you will be rewarded. And if that reward is as small as it will reduce your stress levels, then, you know, that's a reward in itself. So I think pursuing it is the noblest and most amazing journey that anyone could do. It humbles you. It makes you realize that you don't have it figured out. And you know, no matter how much knowledge you've attained in your lifetime, you do something like this and you just go, oh, my glass is completely empty again.
Yeah. And
I think I needed that. I think a lot of people could use that as well.
Amen to that, brother. Get out there, touch the astral grass, play with the psychic knobs and levers, and see what happens. I am genuinely jealous of your Monroe Institute experience, because I think that
you should do it.
I would love to. I would love to.
So I could put you in touch. I'll put you in touch with Paul. He's amazing, and he organizes these things. I highly recommend you do it.
Dude, I would honestly love to, because I feel like that initiation of being there, doing it back to back to back with other people, I feel like that's just, you can't replicate that just like laying in your bed. And, you know, I mean,
that's right.
I'm at the point, like, you and I are both probably similar ages, and I think this is that time. And, you know, I have Jung's Red Book behind me. And this is that time in life where you do one of two things. You have a midlife crisis and you start projecting into the physical world, and, you know, dyeing your hair so it doesn't look gray and all this shit. Or you make the inward turn and you start exploring your psyche, your consciousness, and you try to find a deeper meaning beyond the physical that is not just like grasping for something that's not really there, but you're learning the truth about who you really are. You're trying to find your own soul. And that's what Jung's Red Book is. I mean, it's him going trans-rational and actually having experiences with, what most people would call psychological beings, but there was nothing metaphorical about it for Jung. But anyway, the last question I want to ask you is these higher focus levels. You talked about like Focus 21. I heard Bob Monroe in an interview say like, oh, we don't do Focus 21 outside of the center or whatever, because it's too, like, people need to integrate. Like, they might have crazy experiences, like you said, with beings, with, experiences they can't really make sense of. has that changed? Like, are you allowed, quote unquote, to do that? Or are there still rules around it?
No, you're definitely encouraged to do it. Focus 21, I think they called it the Intergalactic Cafe or something, which is like, you can imagine this like coffee shop, this old diner coffee shop type deal that is at this sort of intersection of all these other cosmic entities that exist on different dimensional levels that come whizzing through. And the idea is that you would sit there at a table and wait for somebody to sit in front of you and have a conversation with you. This is also, he talks about, how does he call it? The third sort of layer of reality.
Oh, locale 3.
Locale 3, there you go.
Yeah.
So locale 3 essentially is this place where all these other dimensions exist. And sometimes you'll encounter things that apparently are, don't have the best intentions. And apparently those things can, be a little tricky, but you can wake up. You can just like snap out of it type deal. That's the idea. I didn't have too much experience with it, but I also will say I haven't been really dabbling with it. I'm still kind of enjoying Focus 10. The out-of-body experience stuff, and Focus 12 maybe. I don't go past that. I will say I had Nelson at Focus 21 is where he had his first out-of-body experience when he reached Focus 21, and then he went into this like crazy portal, whatever that was, before he woke up. But he left his body when he was in a plane after doing like a 40-hour marathon. So he was completely exhausted. Again, exhaustion is one of the number one ways to leave your body. So lack of sleep or like, severe training. I'll go into this. This is an interesting story that I never talked about, but it was maybe a month ago. I had a Focus 15 meditation. Focus 15 is no time, right? So like time doesn't exist apparently during this Focus 15 level. And I remember it was really weird because all of a sudden I was popped into a sort of overhead view of this gas station at night. There's a car and I see the door open. I see somebody get out and I recognize him as being my friend. Instantly, I remembered what this place was. As soon as I saw him, I was like, this is a gas station. I remember this because we were coming back. I was about 21. We were coming back from a bar in the city. So it was about a 45-minute drive. My buddy got out to gas up the car. Now, we'd both been drinking. All right. Very irresponsible. Super young. And it was like 3 a.m. So we're extremely tired. I'm in the front seat. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I want to sleep. But I'm just going to pass out here. But I also don't want to pass out because my friend is at the wheel. And maybe I want to stay awake for him so he doesn't pass out. Right. That's just kind of like a logical thing. And then I remember having this thought of how comfortable the backseat was, like when I was a kid. Like I'd curl up into a ball, and I remember thinking to myself, "Oh yes," like my parents would, grab me out of the back seat, and I was like curled up in a ball. And I remember having this like loving feeling of like being in the back seat is like so comfortable. And so I said to my friend, "Hey, do you mind if I go in the back seat? I'm just going to doze off." He was like, "Yeah, cool." And even to this day, I'm like, that's weird because normally I would just sit with him. It's a 45-minute drive. What am I doing? I would never just out of courtesy, sheer courtesy, I would never get out and go in the backseat. But there was something that was really strong that was like, I need to feel what this feels like again, and kind of like go in the backseat. Anyways, that night, he ended up falling asleep at the wheel and crashing. He crashed into a guardrail.
Wow.
And the engine was actually where I was sitting in the front seat. Yeah, I would have been cut in half.
Holy shit.
So, back to this meditation in Focus 15. I'm watching my friend get out, gas up the car, and I say, "Oh yeah, this is the night he crashed. This is the night that happens." So I was like, "Okay." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to get out of the car now and go in the back seat." Only I wasn't. And so I was like, "Oh, well, I should get out now. I should go because he's going to get back in. I have to get out and go in the back seat." So I tell myself, trying to tell myself, hey, get in the back seat. Go in the back seat. Come on, get in the back seat. Wouldn't move. And so in my meditation, I remember thinking how lovely the back seat was and how comfortable that would be if I just went in the back seat, kind of like when I was a kid. And all of a sudden I remember my parents picking me up in the back seat, how comfortable it was. And I was trying to send this to myself. And that's when the door opens. Wow, I see myself get out. I zoom out of this memory. And I wake up out of my, I'm having goosebumps right now. And I wake up out of my Focus 15 meditation, which is about no time. And I somehow, I was like, the sci-fi nerd at me is like, whoa,
bro,
retrocausality.
Yeah.
This is sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was strange just because I didn't know what I was looking at until this memory was presented, until I figured it out. So it wasn't like I willfully went there. And that's what stood out to me as strange. But yeah, I never shared that. That's interesting.
Wild, dude.
Yeah. So it's like these type of things that you get during meditation. They're not always out of body. Sometimes your consciousness is being projected. Sometimes it's being projected in time, through space, and maybe a different life or whatever that is. I don't know. But I just thought that like I said, the nerd within me was like, whoa, that's really cool.
That's so crazy, dude. Yeah. I mean, I know at this point in the conversation, we can't even bring up UFOs, but when I was talking to Dr. Jeffrey Kripal, he was telling me that, when you hear the phenomenology of what UFOs have looked like, essentially since time immemorial, they're often these balls of glowing light. Yeah. And when you look at what all the mystics say the soul is, they say it's a ball of glowing light.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea that perhaps UFOs could be people who are in a similar state to what you were in, and maybe you were in that state, like visiting your former self, too bad you didn't, see some weird orb of light that night, because then it would just all really make way too much sense. It would make way too much sense. But dude,
I think I was honestly too drunk and tired to see anything. So, I remember thinking to myself, like, I shouldn't do this because my friend is going to fall asleep. Like, I would never in a million years go in the back seat. It's very unbecoming. It's not like me. And so this now was the first time since then that I made sense of why I went in the back seat. This is the only time that I was like, oh, that's why, because where that thought come from.
That's crazy, man. That's crazy. This has been a sensational mind meld, man. Thanks for doing this. I fucking love your channel. I love everything you're doing. I'm always refreshing YouTube, being like, when's the next episode going to drop? Because it's pretty singular, man. Like the combination of the production quality, the content, and just the fact that I don't know for a fact, you're going to be honest, but I definitely have the perception that you're being completely straight up. And it feels like it because it's never so fantastical that it's like, what, really? It's always, it always just seems like, yeah, this fucking seems like how it would be. And it's refreshing, man, because it's rare. And I'm at that point in my life, man, where I can't see myself joining a church. I can't see myself, doing a lot of the things people do, but I'm at this point where I'm like, I need something more than theory. I need something more than books. I need something more than a psychedelic experience once or twice a year. Like, I need to settle into a practice, and I'm really, truly warming up to this method. So, well,
dude, that means so much. Thank you so much for saying all those kind things. I really appreciate that. And it's very validating for me, making YouTube videos, this as well, is not always the most rewarding thing in the world. And, to hear other people who share the space, throw compliments around, I think for me, that's the most rewarding thing I could get externally is from a peer. So thank you so much for that.
Hey, thank you, man. And please keep doing what you're doing.
I will. And I'm going to hook you up with the Monroe Institute. I want you to do it.
I absolutely will, man.
I think maybe there's a reason I came on this podcast, and this might be it.
Let's do this. All right.